2, 1. Hello and welcome back to Miss Finance. On this channel I'll go through all things accounting and finance related and investment related. So if you're a student currently studying towards a financial qualification or small business owner, then you might find this channel useful. So do consider subscribing so you don't miss out on any future tutorials. Now in today's video we're going to go through audit. So we're going to speak about exactly what audit is, what it's like to work in audit, the type of things you'll be doing in audit, and the type of career progression in audit as well. So let me think. I started out in audit, how many years ago? I think it was 7 years ago. So I passed my AAT and then I jumped straight into a role with a different company as a semi-senior auditor. Before that point, I'd had a little bit of experience with audit because I worked in a top 5 firm. And even though I worked in the accounts department, during their busy season they would second out the juniors to the audit department to help them cover with large audits that they had during the summertime. So I think by that point I had probably about 9 months to 12 months worth of experience already. So I kind of had a little idea of what audit was, but I wasn't prepared for what audit was like in a smaller company. First off, if you're looking into audit and you don't really know what it is, a team of auditors will go out to a client's site and they'll perform certain testing in order to evaluate risk and to check that the financial statements do not pose a material misstatement. And the way they will do that is they will look at how a company is structured and they will identify certain risks before they go out on site as part of the planning process. And they will also go through walkthrough testing in order to get an understanding of the system. So from point A to point B with sales recording, purchase recording, they'll also take note of controls and segregation of duty, that sort of thing. Then off the back of that planning, they'll then design tests that are designed to test the system and test the controls that are in place and test the accuracy of the information that that particular client has put into the set of financial statements. So those tests will differ depending on the type of industry, the size of the client, for instance. So the sort of testing that you're likely to see on site is things like a sales walkthrough test, and that will be taking a sales order from a customer, be that via phone, email, post, fax, and then walking that through the system. So the point that the customer's made the inquiry to the quote, to then recording that, to sending out goods, to goods dispatch notes, to then sales invoices, to then recording that on the trade debtors listing, to then matching that through the bank to see that that money has been received by the customer, and then checking out that it's been taken off the trade debtors, for example. So that's an example of a walkthrough test, and that's on the sales side. So if you're looking at the purchase side, you might start with your purchase order. So an individual requesting that certain materials are purchased in order for a product to be made, and that will be in a document. That will be then sent to, say, the likes of the purchase ledger team or procurement, who will then get a quote from the supplier. If that quote is reasonable and they accept that, then they will then order those goods. They will then match those goods to the likes of a goods receipt note and then check that it's a purchase invoice, check that it's being put onto the system correctly, check if that's in trade payables, check the payment that's gone out the bank, and all of the controls in between. So you get an idea then of how the system's working, what individuals are involved in the financial processes and controls that they've got at that client. And then off the back of that, you can then create more testing once you've got an understanding of the systems that they use, the type of volumes that they have, and again, what risks you've identified. So working in audit can be quite challenging because if you're a shy person, like what I was circa a decade ago, you'll find it quite difficult, definitely if you're a junior, to firstly go out on site to a client that you've never spoken to before, people that you've never spoken to before or met before. You've got to have the confidence to be able to go and ask those individuals questions, and a lot of the time you'll be doing that on your own. So the audit senior might say to you, okay, you're going to go ahead and do a sales transaction testing, so you've got to go ahead and sit with the client and the individual who does that within that company and go through, say, a sample of 30 items and check that on the system. And you've got to have the confidence to be able to go ahead and do that. And you've also got to have the confidence to say where you found a misstatement or error of some kind, you've got to then be able to ask the right questions to the client and determine if that is an error, and then go back to the audit senior, put your point across to say you believe this is an error because of X, Y, and Z. And then if you did find an error, you might have to undertake more testing, or you might then note that as a misstatement. So one thing that an auditor will be doing as they're going through the testing is creating a list of any immaterial misstatements and material misstatements. Now, an immaterial misstatement, and they will go through that list with the client, and if the total of all of those immaterial misstatements is not material, then they might not wish to adjust for those items. But if the item is an error that is material, then the client will have to adjust for that. Now, there's sometimes a difference between audit when you're working in a big firm, like the likes of PWC, BDO, Deloitte, KPMG, versus if you're a small company undertaking audits. And what I found definitely when I worked in the top 5 was that when you first put out an audit, when you don't know anything about audit and barely know anything about accountancy as is, you'll tend to be working on one particular section of that audit. So you might be given the task for everything that's bank related. So you might be the individual who's going through and checking the bank reconciliation. You might then be checking the post-year end bank statements for any payables. You might be checking post-year end bank statements for receivables that have cleared after the year end, for example. And a lot of people who go into the top firms can get a little bit frustrated sometimes because they don't realise that that's how it's going to be definitely for your first 6 months. So audit to audit that you're going on, you might just be doing all of the bank, then you might be doing all of the debtors, all of the creditors to expand your understanding until you get to a point where you can do the majority of the balance sheet testing or the majority of the P&L testing and walkthroughs with little guidance. Versus if you're working in a smaller practice, what you might find is that you're involved actually with the planning of the audit as well as the testing of the audit and the conclusion of the audit. So where you're working in a big firm, you might only be involved with the testing of the audit, but you never actually see the final outcome and the final product of the financial statements and the closure meeting with the client. Whereas if you work in a smaller firm, not only will you be involved with the planning and initial risk assessment, but you'll be involved with the testing as well as the conclusion, and you'll get to see the final outcome of the signed financial statements and those being submitted to Companies House. So sometimes when you're making a decision over whether you should work in a top firm versus a smaller firm, the top firms have got obviously the advantage of getting quite a lot of experience and exposure to different things, different risks, different industries, etc. But with a smaller company, you're going to have the added benefit of being involved and seeing the audit from start to finish, which sometimes can give you a better understanding of what's going on and why audits take place and what you're looking for with an audit, and how after all that hard work that you've put in testing the client's information, what the outcome of that is. Now, when you look at a set of financial statements, what you'll see is that there's a page that's called the Directors Report and another page that's called the Auditors Report. So the directors will give an opinion on those financial statements, whether they believe that they are true and fair and whether they are free from material misstatement. Now the auditors will give an opinion on that set of accounts as to whether or not they believe that they are free from material misstatement. So if during the audit the auditors have found, again, material misstatement, then they might give a different opinion to those financial statements than what the directors do. So there are 2 circumstances where an auditor might choose not to issue an unmodified opinion. And that's when the financial statements are not free from material misstatement, or where they've been unable to obtain sufficient appropriate evidence. And on top of that, there are 3 different types of modified opinion that the auditors might give. One is a qualified opinion, one is an adverse opinion, and another is a disclaimer of opinion. So I'm not going to go into each one of those in detail. I'll go into that in detail in another video. But let's move on now to the different career paths that you can take with audit. So you might start off, like I said, with audit semi-senior or just audit junior, and what will happen there is, like I said, you'll be focusing on basic testing, and you'll have an audit senior there or audit semi-senior there who's reviewing your work. And a lot of the times the audit senior will be the most senior individual on site. They'll be running the audit on site. So the actual audit manager will be in the office managing a lot of different audits, whereas the audit senior will be entrusted with carrying out the audit, and they'll be reviewing the audit work on site. So a lot of audits you'll find have actually got quite a fast turnaround. So they're usually about a week to 2 weeks. The longest audit I've ever been on was 6 months, which was a grind. Just never seemed to end. 6 months out at a client. Oh, incredible. They were nice though. So that always makes a difference. What was I saying? Yeah. So you'll have an audit senior out on site who'll review your work as you go. And what you might find when you're an audit junior is that you'll spend, say, 4 or 5 days possibly on the audit, and then the next week on the Monday or whenever that is, it could be a Wednesday, Friday, whenever, you might move on to a different audit entirely. So from one week to another, your place of work is changing, so you're not necessarily in an office environment for a lot of the time in audit. You're out on site at the clients. That might be a little bit different right now because of the current circumstance that we find ourselves in. A lot of it will be remote working, which I could imagine is actually quite difficult. But one of the great things with travelling out to clients, definitely back then, was that you could claim a lot of mileage expense. So as you can guess, as a junior, so you're not being paid the best you could possibly be paid. So those mileage claims could be up to £500 and above a month that you're claiming back purely on travelling to and from a client. And you also get a lunch bonus. I cannot remember exactly how much that was, but it was about £1.45 or something a day. So imagine that over a week, 2 weeks, however many months you're out on different sites, different audits, you'll be getting that back, which is an added bonus. Once you're either studying ACA or ACCA and you're near the end or you are qualified, you will be either an audit senior or audit manager. Now the audit senior will most likely be involved with the planning of the audit, again the running of the audit, the review of the audit, and will be heavily involved with the conclusion of the audit and speaking to the clients at the closing meeting, as well as reporting to the audit manager. Now the audit manager will then report to the audit partner, so again you'll have multiple different audit partners within a practice environment who have a lot of different clients. So it's almost like a triangle effect that I've spoken about before. So you have your audit partner up here, your audit managers here, audit seniors, audit juniors. So all the work the juniors do is reviewed by audit senior. That's then reviewed by the manager, that's then reviewed by the partner. So this segregation of duty, again, reduces the amount of risk that there is with not detecting something. Now, if you're currently either just coming towards the end of your AAT or you're about to take on CIMA, ACA, ACCA, or one of the other qualifications, then you might be undecided as to whether you want to go down this audit route or down the pure accountancy route or industry route even. You might make a change from practice, for instance. So what I'd say to you is that I would be taking a moment just to think about what your career options at that moment in time are, because my route was quite traditional. So I started off in practice, started off in accounts, and I did a lot of medical accounting. I did the bookkeeping for clients on Sage. I did the accounts for a lot of different industries at the time. And when I'd passed my AAT, I then jumped into studying for ACA. I changed firms, and that's when I became audit semi-senior. Because of my background in accounts and medical accounting, I was seconded out to our other office, who were purely medical accountants, so they were specialists in that area. So I had quite a varied career route, to be honest, because most of the time I was doing audit, but I would then jump onto the accounts department, or say the tax department, or even I did a couple of audits looking at pensions, things like that. So it was quite varied, which made every day different, which was really, really good. But it meant that by the time that I'd qualified as ACA, I had all this accounts knowledge, and I also had all this audit knowledge. So I understood risks, I understood controls, but I also understood it from an accounting perspective. And you know, your basics, your double entry, your trial balance, and all of that, which by the end of it made me stand out from a lot of other candidates who were either just purely accounts or purely audit. So I might do another video later down the line just to talk about which of those options you might want to go down in a little bit more detail, but I hope that gave you a little bit of knowledge about what audit is, the type of work you'd be doing, and a little bit of a flavour of what it's like to work in audit in both a top 5 firm and a smaller firm. So if you found any of that useful, do consider subscribing, as it really does help the channel to grow, and hit the like button as well. And hope you're having a nice day, and I shall see you on the next video.